Hopefully this video finds you well, and we're here in the middle of September. It's been a while since we kind of did a route overview, and while the channel's been a little light on route overviews this summer, mainly just because of vacation and work, still a lot of progress being made on a few of the projects we have going on here, model Trainz projects. And as usual, we start here on the Chilli Sub over the core width staging yard. We're set up for a session which I'm in the middle of making a video for, and which is kind of loaded up with preloaded intermodal content. And although there's only one train here in the staging yard, I tend to keep the yard full of different options for putting trains together pretty quickly and seamlessly. I kind of obsessively researched, unfortunately, about the prototype in terms of how each Z train, how each Q train is made up, in terms of the customers who are on it, how the train's built, etc. And so I like to have kind of a lot of options here in the core staging yard as we go about building trains for a session. So everything from spine cars, stack cars, and all types of different load combinations to kind of get the right look and feel for each train that runs on the route, at least on the BNSF side. We got a couple trains over here in the Proviso Blue Island staging yard. As always, typically a UP intermodal train sitting over there, and in this case we'll have a westbound automotive vehicle train in the session. So as we had our usual progress out over core width, past the pet project, which never occurred, the Chicago racetrack, and in here over to milepost 6 as we exit the core staging yard. If this is your first exposure to the route, this is Bruce Carpenter's HO scale BNSF Chilli Sub, which was in Great Model Railroads 2006. I've made a couple small tweaks for my own purposes, but for the most part it's supposed to capture the 95% of the track plan and the scenery for the route. So down low we've got the BRC main, and then on the back side of the scene, the line from Proviso Blue Island, which, as you'll see here in a little bit, pops out at CP East Willow Springs. So we've got a light power move from core width over to Willow Springs for a Z train as we head through Chicago. And like I've talked about in previous videos, this area of the railroad really haven't touched a whole lot outside of putting up fascia, which is nice. So actually at this point the entire route is set up for fascia, and all the dig holes are down and just working on some carpet. So that was a decent amount of work here in the last month to kind of get it release ready. From a release standpoint, I've got it out, the route out to 2 beta testers right now. Nothing big has really come back in terms of exceptions. I do have a little bit of apparently a content issue with some East Coast Trainz comment, which one of the beta testers pointed out, so we'll have to do some swap and replace there. But overall, the assets were, from what I understand, easy to find, and the route loaded up pretty seamlessly for the beta testers. So that's looking good. Targeting here between now and October 1st, and I'm shooting this video here on September 18th to release the route on the download station. What I'll be working on the side is a lot of material which I'll make available via OneDrive or Dropbox, just a lot of supporting material about the route, whether that's train symbols, kind of operating plans for the route in terms of when trains operated, what trains operated, etc. For those of you who kind of want to run it and try and set up prototypical operating sessions. So we're kind of continuing west here on the Chilli Sub in the Chicago area, which is the only double track portion of the model route. You can see we finished off at least the fascia, like I said, for the entire route, and then I'm just working on trying to figure out how to kind of handle this area of the ground textures and cover up some of the gaps, as you can see, that have developed as I've inserted dig holes. It's kind of been a pain in the butt. I'm really putting this off kind of to the end as one of the last steps to it. So we're going to come around the bend here. A little small bit of scenery needed over here in this kind of industrial spur that comes out of Willow Springs with the Budweiser plant here and a small steel customer here. Not going to add a ton of detail to at least this part of the scene, as really the focal point is actually in the, and to me, is in the background with the westbound main. We've got our diverging line to the IHB, which turns this way, our UPS sorting facility here at Willow Springs. And then for those of you who've seen a lot of videos, this is an area that may kind of stand out because I've completely gutted Willow Springs. When I started loading sessions, I just really didn't like how it operated. It was difficult to have multiple trains in there working at a time, which is very close to the prototype in terms of having multiple Z trains in there picking up, setting out traffic, etc. And really just didn't like it. Didn't like the feel of it, for at least how I wanted to model it, which is entirely intermodal. In Bruce's version, there was a kind of mixture of intermodal and manifest merchandise traffic. So we've completely gutted kind of the plan here at Willow Springs. We're going to 3 independent pad tracks, unloading, loading tracks, and start to add a lot of details, a lot more trailers, etc., just to give it more a feel of an intermodal facility. So we've got our 3 pad tracks, 1, 2, and 3. And the other thing I've added, which is in the prototype, is a support yard for empty traffic or other traffic that's not currently on the loading pads. So I've redone this piece twice because I hated it the first time I did it, and so there's been a lot of time in the last couple months here working on the Willow Springs facility, which is really the primary terminal area on this route, and because a lot of the other places are just in staging, whether that's clearing, core width, etc. Those are really staging yards, more than kind of out in front of the audience. So we've got our support yard here, which ties in to the one ladder, and you've got kind of like an escape track out here if you need to pull down and use the lead. But these all tie in right here at West Willow Springs. Here we've redone a number of crossovers to allow for multiple trains to work off both mains. So you can have a train kind of shoving in here off the westbound main into one of the lower pad tracks, 1 or 2, at the same time. Another train shoving in off kind of the eastbound main, so to speak, over to pad track 3. I've done this in a couple sessions off camera that I just didn't have time to put a video together for. And it just looks really nice having kind of 2 trains in here working. The same can be said where you can work a westbound train picking up and then an eastbound train kind of coming in here at pad 3 to set out. Works pretty effectively as well. We still have the lead kind of to this industrial side, which is almost entirely automotive parts, and then I've added, instead of doing parts in a second industry, it's refrigerated boxcars is what we'll be doing to add just a little different dynamic. We still have this lead here which swings out to the automotive facility at Romeoville. Not quite sure how much I'm going to scenic this area. This is kind of more of like a scene blocker to me, with the focal point being behind the backdrop. But we'll see. I really just need to kind of put some people down, some vehicles, just make it seem like it's less dead. So we go behind the backdrop and out here to Romeoville. Knock down the cantilever signal because I just couldn't get the height to line up with the bracket, and put this kind of low, I can't really call it a dwarf, but it's kind of like a severed searchlight signal here at milepost 29. So that was one of the details I've been adding as I get ready to release the route, is adding the appropriate milepost down, which involves kind of looking at the timetable for the route and the prototype, and then lining up those mileage points and laying down mileposts. So the entire route's now got mileposts, at least the relevant points, control points, etc. For the route. As we enter the single track portion of the HO scale Chilli Sub, nothing really in this area. You can see the lag in here is just horrendous. I'm running only about 15 frames, which I really don't understand. There's not a ton going on in here, but this area's really always struggled lag wise. So I may try swapping out some assets before I release to see if that improves it. We go around a small riverbed and then into the town of Chillicothe. We really haven't made many changes outside of just detailing the river a little bit more, and kind of trying to lay the fascia around. Still a little work to clean that up, but more or less we haven't touched Chillicothe at all since kind of earlier videos. We head through the backdrop and then to an area called Edelstein, and this is an area that's seen a tremendous amount of work this summer, especially in the last month or so. couple things to note in the prototype. If any watched the playlist I created on the channel, the backdrop runs right here along the back side of the main line. When I was building this area, didn't really use the entire end of the baseboard when I lined it up, and so I ended up with this vacant space, and really just wanted to do something with it. And I just watched so many videos about the line to get a better picture of the scenery, the trains, how everything looks, etc. And there's a lot of shots kind of across open fields at trains passing at a perpendicular angle, as whoever's working the camera kind of traces it left to right, right to left as the train's at speed. And I figured it'd be a good thing to just kind of create a wide open area out here that feels very kind of Midwestern. And then you kind of have the ability, as I'll show you here, to look back across the main line, and it doesn't feel like you're on a model railroad. You've got a lot of scene depth with this grain elevator here, which is supposed to represent ADM, and even back here in the back left, back towards Williamsfield. So the idea is you're on a model railroad, but you don't necessarily feel like one. And that's what I really like about kind of just taking, really all it took was about 30-40 minutes to go from nothing here just to something simple, to kind of fill some space and create some depth. So the Edelstein area is very industrial on the route. We've got a steel customer, and then a shipping warehouse here, which has high cube box cars. And this route, area route, I really like how it came together. I was kind of afraid to start it in terms of getting the right assets that fit in the space, which is always a struggle when you're working with someone else's track plan, is finding the right assets that fit and can serve the purpose of what you're trying to do. So this area has been a lot of fun to switch and kind of pull and place traffic from both customers here right off the main, and try and do that without tying up the main line for long periods of time. As we head west towards Williamsfield, we pass the ADM grain elevator, which last time had no scenery. So we've kind of done some light scenery here. There won't be a whole lot more done, just because the real point of this is the massive elevator infrastructure. So I may add a couple people here or there, but otherwise, because of how little space there is between the backdrop and the fascia, not a whole lot to add. I'm working on kind of switching and how you switch the industry and kind of have that figured out. And things like that will be in content I release, and follow-up videos after the routes release in terms of how to do this, how to do that, and best practices on the routes, because I spent a ton of time operating it to try and get an idea of the best way to do some of these things, whether it's run trains on the main line or serve some of the industries on the route. We head here into Williamsfield. We've got the Illinois Edison power plant, and head west through Williamsfield. And I'm going to change my settings. I'm not sure really what's going on here with just a lot more lag than typically have here in the route, because I'm typically getting 25 to 30 frames. Right now only running in the low 20s, so not really sure if I just need to restart or what the deal is. But we haven't really done any work here in Williamsfield. I need to add people to the main drag here through town, and really haven't tried to serve this industry yet, but it looks pretty straightforward. We've got the Amtrak station, and then head west into Stronghurst. We've got another steel customer here at Stronghurst, which is served off the main line, and then swing around this curve up on what I call the ramp, because it's pretty good uphill run, to Knox, which is just a intermediate signal, back on the backside of Williamsfield, and then we appear back over here at Galesburg. So Galesburg we haven't really touched a whole lot since the beginning, but as you can see, the route is more or less done. A couple areas I'm going to put a little more scenery down, but as any of you have released routes where once you kind of get to the end, it's just kind of time to stop nitpicking yourself and just kind of get something out there. So I'm pretty excited about releasing this route. I've got 2 other projects in mind that I'm interested in starting next after I release this, and then the Conrail St. Louis line, which I plan to release in October. Both routes, this being the Chilli Sub and the St. Louis line, are both for Trainz a New Era, and so I can't guarantee any backwards compatibility in TS12, but I'm excited, getting really close, and I know a lot of you have written really nice comments in terms of being along for the journey and wanting to get your hands on the route, so we'll make that available here soon. But I appreciate it. Obviously, a lot of the feedback I've gotten and just the interest in the route just makes it all more fun. So that's it for the Chilli Sub for now. I'll be posting a session video, which we're set up for here sometime in the next week or so, and for that we're on to the St. Louis line. Hey everyone, so now we're on our update of the HO scale St. Louis line. For those of you it's your first exposure to the route, this is something I've come up with the track plan for and built based on the prototype, which operates from downtown Indianapolis out towards East St. Louis, Missouri. In particular, we cover from here at CP Hunt on the west side of Indianapolis, through Avon Yard, through a number of small towns with industries, and the route ends, at least for this model portion, at Terre Haute, Indiana, where the CSX and Conrail lines back in the 90s crossed each other at grade at Haley Tower. So this is an area, we start here at CP Hunt, which is the very eastern side of the railroad. We'll be working from east to west, and this is an area that was ravaged by the import from TS12 into Trainz a New Era. We've rebuilt it. I've used kind of Google Street Views and some satellite photos to get an idea of what this area is, and there are a lot of houses, not necessarily this close to the tracks, but a lot of residential neighborhoods, and then the same way on the other side of the tracks, a lot of distribution warehouses, etc. So we've put a small one in here in terms of a small street neighborhood, adding a couple more details like a fire hydrant, etc. Some people and children at play, but for the most part, I feel like this has been a nice little addition here to the front side of the route, with the distribution center here on the other side. In terms of some of the trains you're going to see as we progress the route, this is still set up from a session video I released earlier this summer about first shift at Avon Yard and some of the train activity that I model around there. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. It's on the channel under the St. Louis line playlist, and it's about 30-35 minutes in length, and I spent a lot of time just developing the session and how the trains are going to run, so that was a lot of fun producing that. As we head west towards Avon Yard, I've left a lot of the scene open and haven't worried about some of the areas that aren't close to the tracks, just to save frame rates and time. We head here into NY Cabin, where the main line diverges to head north around the yard, and then 2 yard leads, which allow access to all the tracks. This area was covered pretty heavily in the session video, so I'll kind of scoot through here because not a whole lot of work's been done since the session was produced. And really, as we talk about the areas of the route that need the most work, this curve we're coming up to here is really one of the last pieces that needs rework from the TS12 import. I can't figure out excuse me, this barbecue place keeps appearing and reappearing kind of randomly in the game. So it won't appear in a session, it'll be in the route, it won't be in the route, it'll appear in a session. I just can't figure it out. But so for now, until it disappears again, I'm just going to leave it here. So we've got an area where a municipality's got a bunch of school buses, where they do their servicing and parking in off hours, but I really need to fill in this area with something more substantial here as we approach this small creek. I've done this up just to kind of, there's a couple pictures that were taken, and I apologize, the photographer's name escapes me, but I came across them on the web, and just some great shots of the line in the 90s, which, as I was doing research for it initially before I even had a track plan, just really kind of drew me in, just how scenic some of these areas of western Indiana are, and how great they can be for shooting trains. So this area is inspired by the photography I saw, and I'll include this in the video credits. Some of the things that I forget to mention or can't remember at the time because I failed to write it down on my notes. But we head west back over towards Danville and Fillmore, where we have industries. Really just some filler work to do here. Everything else pretty much stayed intact coming out of TS12. We've got a coal train headed back to Utah, seen here. And I picked up these Utah Belt freeware C44s from ARM, which are a nice find. This area was previously just kind of empty as I squared off the fascia to create a little more depth with the super elevated curve. And so this area is kind of done, and we can move on to some of the other less scenic areas. Here as we head towards Greencastle, we're crossing over the CSX line to Lafayette, and then the branch to of the connection to Conrail kind of comes in here on the north side of the main line. One of the major changes we made here at Greencastle, a lot of the scenery is the same. Before, these two yard tracks were disjointed, and I don't know why I built this the way at the time, but they would separate and come back together, then separate and then come back together. You end up with two kind of short, stubby siding yard tracks. I know it's not technically the right word, but it just didn't make a lot of sense. And I'm trying to do some traffic here, either store unit trains here for this customer here, Merchants Grain, do some block swapping, which Conrail did back in the day, with trains out of St. Louis bound for Pittsburgh and Avon, but do more here is basically the point. So all I really did to free up the space was I pulled the elevator a little farther back towards the fascia, and then freed up just enough room to get the second track. And so you can see we've got kind of two quasi-yard tracks which tie in together here down at this switch before you head back out on the main line at this control point. Another area needing a little bit of scenery is right here, this little edge of farmland. Put a kind of a little stream creek in here because there is a lot of standing water with some of the ridges, etc. in the area. And then a really nice shot, in my opinion, just headed back towards, over the super elevated curve, back towards the east, towards Danville and Fillmore. And you can kind of see the super elevation, especially on the inside. And that's just a thing I love about Trainz New Era. It's the super elevation of the curves. As we head west, we hit North Terre Haute, Indiana, replaced all the gates that weren't working correctly or showing up in the game, and got them reconfigured. And really, scenery-wise, this is one of the first places I redid in Trainz New Era. Once I had it installed and ready to go, we head here to CP Preston, where the Conrail main line is going to cross the Sioux line right here at grade. And I don't know if anyone else has found any other assets, but these clickety-clack triggers we used to work to make the diamond sounds. At least I can't get them to work in Trainz New Era. So if anyone knows of any assets or how to get these to work, please leave a comment, because I think they really made a nice sound for diamonds. That was a lot better than the typical train sound. As we head west here through CP Preston, we've got the yard lead to Duane Yard, which is a small industrial yard that serves customers in Terre Haute, and started adding some track bumps, which is a Trainz New Era feature, and really west towards the crossing of CSX. The thing I've been spending the most time on here at Haley Tower, as we kind of end the route here as we head into staging, is setting Haley up to be an interlocking tower. And what I mean by that is that there's actually interlocking tower assets, for those who aren't familiar, which can preset paths for trains. If you're just kind of running around and you're not worried about having trains meet like they're supposed to and junctions being occupied, or in this case having two lines cross at grade and not being worried about the signal showing the correct aspect, then interlocking towers really aren't for you. Don't waste your time. If you're interested in having sessions being as automated as possible, where you're just kind of sitting back, taking pictures, taking videos, kind of taking in the action, or running one train with all these other trains running around you, then I highly recommend getting into interlocking towers, especially if you have more complicated junctions and control points, places where multiple lines come together. The primary asset I use for this, I've actually put here behind the backdrop, which is, and now I've got to remember the actual name. So it's the Crocombe Heathfield signal box. I've already pre-configured, spent a lot of time, a couple hours actually, on some routes for the Haley Tower interlocking. And if anyone's interested, I've started to do some video clips to kind of walk through this, but it is going to take a decent amount of work to create a video for it. So if there's enough interest, obviously please leave a comment if you're interested in kind of a walkthrough of interlocking towers. Some of the ones I've seen and found on YouTube is just people kind of laying track on a blank baseboard and walking through it, and I kind of would be more interested in making a video that actually walks you through kind of a prototype on a route and some of the things I've learned, at least best practices, because I'm also implementing one or two of these on the Chilli Sub for those who are interested. So I won't walk through how to set it up, but basically, as you can see here, you've got paths defined, which cause the signals to lock up in one direction or the other as trains progress through the area. So just to give kind of the easiest idea, this is the one I've left highlighted, is the a move southbound on the CSX. I haven't set up every route yet, but what it causes is basically as soon as the train starts approaching on this side, and I've got one staged here to head south, it will lock up and basically set, I have it configured to set the two Conrail signals on either side to stop, and then the CSX signals here to automatic. So what it does is effectively is it drops, when it senses approaching on the CSX side, it drops the Conrail signals to stop if the Conrail routes aren't already active. So if there's already a Conrail train kind of inside the boundaries of what I've defined as Terre Haute, then the CSX signals won't trigger until the Conrail train clears. And I've just really liked kind of the realism that's come with it, and it really helps with session building. And what I mean by that is you're not having to define every single track mark every time you run a session for each train to take. You can predefine these paths you're going to use each time, and then in the session itself set triggers where that train's going to set a certain path once it crosses that point. So I won't get into it more. I said there's enough interest. I'd be more than happy to make a video because it took a lot of time to kind of learn the ins and outs of this, but I've loved what it's given me in terms of flexibility of creating realistic operating sessions for the route, some of which I'll be using in the next video, which I started to make and then stopped once I got back into the Chilli Sub. So you can see with the St. Louis line, we're not very far, shooting for October, and I'll be pinging some of the community who I've used before to potentially beta test, and like I said, just really looking forward to this pet project. And once the Chilli Sub and this are released, I'll be moving on to something new. And now just kind of a high level of where we stand with the route of North Jersey. So now for our last route update for this video, it's the North Jersey route. I initially called it Conrail North Jersey, and that's what the content file will be called, but realistically you can operate this as a, early 2000s, mid 2000s CSX NS route, or as a 1990s Conrail route, whatever suits your fancy. So unfortunately this is also the ugly duckling of the three routes, as I'm doing a ton of content replacement and scene rebuilding here in Trainz New Era, because I just took a ton of scenery shortcuts, just kind of put things down, and after going back and looking at prototype photos, Google Street Views, etc., just kind of said, no, we're going to start over with a lot of these scenes. So no timeline on this route at all, which I know a lot of people are interested in North Jersey just based on some of the comments and direct messages I get, but this is definitely the last of the three routes that would be released. So where we are now is we're on what's called the P&H, the Passaic and Aramis portion, which runs from CP Valley up to South Kearney and then on towards CP Marion. So this is primarily used for intermodal trains accessing South Kearney or through trains through New Jersey, which are not touching Oak Island. So we're crossing the Point No Point area as we head towards Kearney. And one of the things, there used to be just a line of houses here along the roadbed, and I just went through looking, like I said, satellite photos, and in no way was that realistic of how this area is actually laid out. So those all got torn up, built a little estuary in here, and still working on the scenery, and then building a power plant here at Point No Point. So as we head through CP Kearney, that's K-A, though the yard is spelled K-E-A, we head around, no significant track work changes here, and then into Kearney. The other thing we've done is kind of taken the space in the back, which was a highway, and laid out what's supposed to be the New Jersey Transit Morrison-Essex line. While the lines don't get quite this close in the prototype, I love the blend of commuter and freight in the same scene, and it just made sense to kind of fill up the rest of the backdrop. So there's a loop behind the camera for the passenger trains to allow for continuous running in the background as you operate freight trains. You have a small industry here, which is served off New Jersey Transit. Initially it was served off of the P&H, but to add a little complexity and put this line to even more use, what we've done is actually added a connection down here off the main one. So local will actually come out, have to come on New Jersey Transit to serve this customer, and then come back out. And I just, like I said, adding a little complexity to something that was previously just kind of blank background. Like I said, no track work changes here. I spent a lot of time when I built South Kearney a number of years ago, just taking time to make sure it functioned correctly. And the other scene I'm starting to rebuild is the one here at Hack over. So I had a lift bridge here previously, and in Trainzing New Era, adjusting its height was just brutal. It kept throwing off the track heights and just complete mess. And so what I've done is I've taken a number of structures here and just kind of kit bash something. While it's not a lift bridge, it's a large span over a large body of water, which is paralleled by a highway bridge, which is very common in North Jersey. So don't have the lift bridge for effect, which is what the drawbridge at Hack actually is, but I think it from a visual perspective does well just because it's a large structure. So as we come over, we've got a distribution center here, and then this is something, just looking at Google Street Views, I decided to do. It's sort of scrap plus a DOT yard with construction items, plus a lot of assorted other things. And saw this frequently, just kind of going through Street Views, and I'm almost done modeling it. Most of the primary details are down. And then as we head through CP Jersey, I used to have kind of CP Marion in view, and the one thing about this route, why I'm hesitant to even consider releasing in the future, is the frame rates are terrible on it, just because of how tight I built everything, how many peninsulas there are. As you can see, Upper Bay here off to the right, it's a real drag on performance, more so than any other route I've either built or used. And so I'm trying to kind of manage the frame rates to be that are similar to the Chilli Sub and the St. Louis line, and so that kind of requires me to manage scenes to maximize performance. And so this used to have the siding at CP Marion started in view, and instead I've cut that off with a New Jersey Transit line kind of going over the top and protecting the entrance to a staging yard. So this is an area completely redone with all new scenery here in Trainzing New Era, as it was all corrupted when I brought it in from TS12. Like I said, kind of a little construction yard here. And this is an area I'm trying to, like I said, just pay a lot more attention to, which is kind of the river view of Hack. And I really like how this turned out. Took a lot of time just figuring out kind of how it should be laid out. A lot of reeds, cattails, whatever you want to call them, which try to mix them in enough that there's not a huge lag. But this just feels like a North Jersey scene now, where before it was just kind of a mess of nothing without much thought. So I like how this came out. Currently kind of taking up the road here and considering putting more scenery items down between the road and and the fascia. One of the things I obsess about with the intermodal terminals is really any industry that I model is how the truck's going to come in and out. And I spend a lot of time just kind of looking at pictures on the web of different setups, and I'm kind of getting away from that. So what I'm thinking here is I'm actually going to get rid of the gate and everything and just lay this area in with a ton of trailers, because that's what South Kearney looks like from the air, and if you're ever physically on the ground. So kind of taking this whole road up, not obsessing about how the truck's going to leave, and just making it kind of trailers all the way to the edge of the entire area. So we'll see how that turns out. May hate it and end up starting from scratch, but like I said, the long haul to a usable Trainz a New Era route here with this North Jersey map is en route. So currently don't have any video shot of any trains operating, as I've only really been testing some of the new track configurations. So but hopefully something towards the end of the month, early September, in terms of some video content for the route. So that makes kind of puts a wrap on the route updates for now. Apologize, like I said, for how long it's been, but life comes first, and unfortunately Trainz a New Era comes second. So happy week everyone, and see you next time.